Hi, welcome to this week's edition of Blue Soccer. Again, John and Dave and myself. We're going to look back over the round of 16, well, it'll be round of 14 matches in last week's European Cup. Of course, look forward to the quarterfinals this week and obviously our big game against the Exeter Chiefs on Saturday. So, lads, unfortunately, as I mentioned, our game against Toulon was cancelled because one of the Toulon lads picked up COVID. But there was still a great feast of action to pick through before we turn our attention to our game on Saturday.
Yeah, but my TV and my Skybox went into hibernation. I spent so much time on the couch watching them.
Yeah, well, why don't we just talk about the Munster-Toulouse game first as to kick it off? Just briefly run through them. I'm
sure we'll talk about the game inside, but for a guy who's supposed to be the best player in his position in the world, I was really disappointed with Antoine Dupont on Saturday. I thought that because there was a period, he did lots of stuff really well, and he ran some great cheat lines to score those tries, really, really good. But for a guy who's supposed to be the best player in that position in the world, when Munster were really good in that middle third, we'll say 10, 15 minutes before halftime, 10, 15 minutes after halftime, he did nothing. I mean, the guy you'd look to give them direction, to give his team direction, get them playing in the right parts of the field, to put Munster kind of back in their box, and he did nothing. You couldn't find him with like the world champion. Where's Wally Finder? I was very disappointed with him.
That match reminded me of the final of the European Cup last year with Exeter and Racing. When you're watching it, you expect one team, because of the way that they're playing, to walk away with it. And Racing opened the door for Exeter, and Exeter are good enough to take that opportunity. And Toulouse should have had that game won and hosed and home and not even worried about. And they let Munster in it, and there was only 7 points in it at the end. And you could say that Toulouse had a fortuitous try given to them for the crooked in at the line out, even though your man did brilliantly to take it one-handed. And the knock on that hit the guy's arm and seemed to go backwards and hit his head and went forward, possibly could have been, disallowed with a different ref and a different TMO. So they just I was expecting Toulouse to have been this sensational team, but ultimately they were a bit disappointing, even though they won.
I'd agree with all that. I mean, it was a great game of rugby. It was a very enjoyable game of rugby. And there was moments. There was a point in that game, like you say, maybe around the 50-60 minute mark, where it could have gone either way depending on who got the next score. The thing is, and it kind of goes back to something I was saying to John there just before we started. If you take your foot off Munster's throat, they won't ask twice for the second chance. If you have your foot on their throat, you have to push down, because otherwise they'll come back at you.
Yep. You better make sure you kill them.
Yeah. Never leave a wounded Munster in your rearview mirror.
Yeah. Well,
I suppose just a bit of news, there were concerns that Larkham might be leaving and going back to the Waratahs, or going to the Waratahs. But you'd have to say, have they really looked that? He's been there 2 years. Have they? No, has he done that much with them? It doesn't look like it's.
I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb with this theory here, but back in the days when Rob Penny was in Munster, he was trying to play that wide game that we all remember, and having the lads out in the tram tracks, and he was ridiculed by fans. And while none of us know what the players actually thought, there was a feeling that the players weren't really buying into it, that they were kind of, well, it's new and it's fancy, but it's not really Munster. And then Pat Lam came to Connacht with a very similar game plan very, very soon afterwards, if not at the same time. And they all bought into it and won the bloody league, from nowhere, from a team that were nowhere. And that game kind of had its day in the mid-teens, I suppose. And it was a game plan that really suited Connacht anyway. But there was the feeling that Munster just didn't buy into it. If Munster could have bought into it the way Connacht did with Pat Lam, maybe they would have won. Maybe they would have even won Europe. But they just never. It just never caught on with them, and maybe that's because Connacht were more of a blank slate, whereas Munster were kind of, well, we've won this Europe a few times, and we did it the hard way, and we did it with this, Munster rugby, which is all true, but they don't have the players the type of players that they had back in those days that suits that game. Because Munster were further down the road and had more of a pedigree, and they were the team that won with their great forward power in the mid-noughties, there was this feeling that it didn't suit their DNA, that game plan, whereas Connacht were a blank slate, that Pat Lam could, also the players suited the game, he had your man, that Scottish, whatever, I can't remember his name now. He was the second row with great hands. He used to do all the stuff in the middle of the park.
Ali Muldowney.
Ali Muldowney, that's him. Whereas Munster just have this thing that there's the Munster way, and and all teams do to an extent. But Stephen Larkham comes in as a guy who's supposed to be able to get a backline move and be able to do some really serious stuff, which again, it's never been the Munster way, and maybe they don't trust it or something, or call me old-fashioned, but maybe that's partially the reason why we're not seeing anything great from Stephen Larkham's coaching. Well, that and the fact that they haven't had Joey Carberry, who should be pulling those type of strings on the paddock for very long. So yeah, maybe Stephen Larkham is disillusioned down there, but like they've got two world-class guys, Graham Rowntree and Stephen Larkham. They're kind of proven guys. Whether they suit Munster is a different matter, but that's hanging a lot of stuff around somebody's neck, that not only do you have to bring some really great coaching, but you have to suit what we've done before as well. I'm not sure that's...
There are a lot of rumours going around about the New South Wales Waratahs job. There was a piece in The Guardian this morning about how the Waratahs are kind of thinking, well, will we go with the tried and trusted and reappoint Michael Cheika? And they've already seemed to have paved the way for that by putting Chris Whittaker in temporary charge. And then there's the other, are they going to go and take a novel approach and appoint Brad Thorne, who's already in a job, but, it's the Waratahs, so they should have no problems easing him out. I'm not so sure that Munster are as, if you like, not... I think you're kind of suggesting that the players aren't really buying into the Steve Larkham game plan.
No. Well, just a theory.
Or positing that there could be a situation where they're not. I'm not sure that Munster players have the ability to do that, the current crop, the way that the previous crop did to Rob Penny. I mean, the previous crop had multiple Heineken Cups under their belts. They had Grand Slams under their belts, Lions tours, the whole lot. I'm not sure this group really have the ground to stand on, if you know what I mean, to push back, because, I mean, are there any... I mean, the only players in that Munster squad who've actually won anything are the guys from Leinster.
Harsh but true.
It's true, though.
Yeah,
it's very hard to win anything when your front row is just not really Heineken Cup winning standard.
That's very true. Actually, I will have to say that I was actually really impressed with Stephen Archer at the weekend, because I thought he was going to get sliced, diced, and served up as sushi, and he actually did really well. I mean, he survived.
Yeah. No, I mean, in fairness to Stephen Archer, he looked like a guy who was never going to be anything other than mediocre, and he's raised his game over the last few years to be more than mediocre. Now, he's not Tyke Furlong, but who is? So you got to admire a guy who gets stuck in and improves, because he really did look. He used to be just a permanent collapse about 5 years ago.
I think the problem for Munster is not that he's not Tyke Furlong or that he's not Andrew Porter. The problem for Munster is that he's not even within Cooey and Michael Bent.
Who is?
I think it's very average now to say. I don't see the I don't see the love in here, lads. I don't have it for you.
I don't think I
Just
don't think
we
of
move on,
describing
just
as
to
one
relegate.
notch above rubbish as a love in, Jay.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Right. So La Rochelle, the heir apparent of Munster's future coach. La Rochelle beat Gloucester away, which is a good result for them.
And were seriously impressive doing so.
I saw a little clip of. Yeah, I saw Gara speaking who, again. Comes across so good when he's interviewed. He was on BT Sport giving a little 3-minute interview and just so precise. And I mean, it must be a pleasure to be coached by him because he's got an outlook on the way he wants his teams to play, which I think is very refreshing. And it's actually interesting that over the course of those matches, proper running rugby has made a comeback instead of the monotonous kicking that we saw, previously in previous seasons, which is actually encouraging to see.
Well, ironically, the most impressive thing about La Rochelle, okay, the running rugby was great and all that, but the most impressive thing about them was that they did the opposite of Toulouse. When they had Gloucester beaten, they kept them beaten. It was almost like a switch flipped in their heads, and all of a sudden they weren't going to play any rugby whatsoever in their own half. Once Gloucester were beaten, Gloucester were going to have to score worldies. Gloucester were going to have to play world-class rugby just to get out of their own half. La Rochelle were very, very precise. They were very. It was actually quite brutal to watch. Not necessarily physically brutal, but there was a level of mental brutality taken out against Gloucester in the last 20 minutes. That was, might trouble the engravers.
Well, there's Rogers' influence. There's a man who was well able to keep a team pinned back in their own half. So it's easy to see where they got that trick. It was it's almost a cliche. It was such a party trick of his, and his boot was so good. Even still is, I believe. He can still when he's just out and training with the guys, he can put it on a sixpence to this day. But yeah, it's good to see a new team. They're only a wet day in the competition, and I think I saw them playing the Challenge Cup final when we were at the Saracens game. It was the night before this when we lost the Saracens in 19. And yeah, it was good to see them in European competition. My recollection is they lost that day, but
yeah,
I could be wrong. I had a fair few.
Your recollection is correct.
Okay. But yeah, I'd like to see Lyon as well. I know they lost, but they did play well for a while against Exeter. I'd like to see new teams in the competition. Indeed, Exeter themselves, only not that long, and I know they're champions, but they played us in their first game and nearly got a draw at the death in about 2011 or so. So yeah, I'm happy with that, but it's interesting as well. The round of 16, the whole concept of it, as instead of having the last two rounds, I think it's something that they might have stumbled on something by accident here that might continue because you get meaningful knockout games earlier, and it's probably going to be better than these two-legged quarterfinals. I'm not convinced by them.
No, I don't like those either. But at the same time, you've got a team like Sale who lost both their matches and are into a quarter and get into the round of 16. So, I mean, there has to be some kind of, application of some kind of, they have to think about it a little bit more. I think the round of 16 is good. It's an extra round of high quality rugby. It's a matter of when you have it, after how many rounds of group stage you have it. It might be better that way, but I've nothing against it per se. It's how it's used.
Sure. Agreed.
Claremont scored a try in the last minute to beat Wasps.
Yeah.
Jimmy
Copper's giving away the penalty.
Yeah, we were amongst ourselves. We were texting. He was 37 or 38, next birthday. He's still kicking along.
Fair play to him.
And just as I as I text that, he gave away the penalty to lead up into the try.
Well, I was actually I don't have BT Sports, so I was actually on a dodgy stream, and it just gave up just as they were under the posts attacking. So literally, it was in the 82nd minute. So I literally didn't know what.
You didn't miss anything. You didn't miss anything, John.
Well, I missed a match-winning try, but other than that, I didn't miss anything.
I don't think. I mean, Claremont. I mean, it was a great game. It was very to and fro, but Claremont have more flakes than Teddy's. Like
They do.
Yeah, they do. You mentioned briefly Exeter, who were playing on Saturday, beating Leon. Leon got off to a flying start. I think they were 17-0 up after about a quarter of an hour, and then they kind of faded away. Exeter looked good.
That has got to give Exeter huge confidence that they can be 17-0 down at home to a French team, come back, wipe the floor with them. And the week before they meet us, I can see that only being a good thing for them, and yes, we're all saying that we've been rested, and that's the overall.
I'm not.
Is a better thing.
We'll get to that, lads. We'll get to
anyway,
that.
We will.
Okay, Racing thumped Edinburgh 56-3. I didn't see this game, but
Me neither.
obviously very one-sided.
It was extraordinarily one-sided. Racing were super entertaining. I mean, some of the rugby they played was delightful. Edinburgh were utter shite. They actually went over in the first minute or second minute for a try that was chalked off. It would have been because of something that happened back to pitch, and Racing never gave them another sniff.
I see they're saving themselves for the Rainbow Cup,
Yeah, they must be all right.
Okay, Bordeaux 36, Bristol 17. So Pat Lam's Bristol blinded in the Premiership, but taken down a peg or two by Bordeaux.
Yeah, watch that one as well. I'm trying to think back. I'm trying to sort through my memories of each game. Yeah, Bristol looked like Pat Lam's second season in charge of Connacht before it all clicked. You could see the game plan, you could see the concept, but the execution wasn't there.
Well, he's there 3 years, is he?
Yeah. He's flying it in the Premiership, and he picked a very strong team. But Bordeaux just squeezed them out of it. Bordeaux, I mean, it's Bordeaux. The club is what people might forget is Bordeaux is UBB, Union Bordeaux Bègles, which is the United Clubs of Bordeaux and Bègles. And any of us who are old enough to remember that French Bègles side from the late 70s and early 80s, who were the most frightening pack in the history of rugby ever.
So it doesn't mean they all have beagles. Oh well.
No, it doesn't. No, they don't go beagling. No, the Bègles were able to. I mean, apart from the fact that they are still French and can play, like they play the rugby that Pat Lam is trying to teach teams how to play. They play that naturally, but they've also got a frightening pack.
Yeah, so they march on. In fact, there's a lot of French representation. There's 2 all French. There's 5 French teams in the quarterfinals, I believe.
Yeah,
which is rather a lot.
The final match was Sale, as you mentioned earlier, Dave. They lost both their pool matches, yet managed to make it into the round of 16, and then they beat Scarlets 57-14 to make it into the last day. Yeah, like I just had a look there, right? So only 4 clubs from the Pro 12 made it into the round of 16. So that's a poor return. Obviously, the 3 matches that were played by Pro 12 sides, all 3 were beaten. In those 3 matches, the combined scores for the 3 Pro 12 teams was 50 points, and they conceded 153. So there's a difference of 103 points. And then the Challenge Cup is even worse, because obviously it was the bottom half of the other 16 clubs made it into the Challenge Cup. And of that, in every match, there was a Pro 12 side. So there was 8 Pro 12 sides in the Challenge Cup matches, and only 2 won of those 8 games. Ulster beaten Quins, and I watched that match. Quins put out their thirds, and Treviso beat Agen, who have actually lost all 20 matches in the top 14. So
and
they were hardly
throwing it in anyway.
Yeah, as we know, and so those they weren't great, notable victories when you consider the thirds from Quins and Agen's poor performance. And when you think about the Pro 12 this year, particularly this year, Connacht finished second in their pool, and they won 50%. They won 8 games of 16 in the regular season, so they won 50% and finished second. That's a pretty poor indictment of the standard of the league when a team that comes, let's call it fourth in the league, wins 50% of its matches. And I just had a look before we started, going back over the last 5 or 6 seasons of how Pro 12 teams have done to get into the quarterfinal. So there's going to be 1 representative in this year's quarterfinal. There was 2 last year. There was 5 in the 18-19 season, and in the year that we won it, the 17-18 season, there was 3. So it's been a steady decline of representatives from the Pro 12 in the European quarterfinals over the last, say, 4 or 5 seasons. Which is worrying for our league, that the standard is dipping. And this when was it? Maybe when did we play them? October, was it? We played Saracens. We all said, well, is the standard of the competition good enough and fierce enough that when we do come up against a very tough side like Saracens, we're not battle hardened enough to compete? And has it actually? It's probably disimproved, in fact, over the past year.
The Pro 14 this year has been a steaming pile of fetid shite. Yeah. It has been utter and complete garbage. Now, you know me, normally I'd defend the Pro 14, Jay. I'd be quite a firm spokesman in its favor. And I don't necessarily think that, because teams that get through the quarterfinals is dependent an awful lot on the other teams. But you watch the Pro 14 this year and you are seeing utter muck week in, week out. It is crap. And I am seriously concerned that we are going to come into a game against an Exeter team who are after all European champions and are some of the most ruthless bastards to ever play the game of rugby in the modern era. Totally undercooked. We haven't had a serious game of rugby at all since the Saracens game.
Well, obviously, if you don't,
a few interpros, Dave, I would suggest but most of the other matches we play weakened teams, and with putting 40, 50 points on, and we've spoken about this, and I know John has a different opinion, but really, I don't get much pleasure from watching Leinster win and score 40 or 50 points. I just think it's banal, and it's not a challenge. It's not a competition. And
well, I agree with you. Sport without competition isn't sport. And there's been very little competition. I mean, even you talk about the interpros. I mean, okay, we played the under 11s against Connacht and we got our asses handed to us. Well, we didn't. We got beaten and probably deserved it. But you look at the games against Ulster. Ulster are by the numbers the second best team in the Pro 14, right? And double scores in each game, wasn't it? 24-12 and 38-17 or something. Double scores. That's not a competition. We're talking about the Munster game the other day and how we beat Munster in the final. And I mean, we were able to play as badly as we did in terms of things like our finishing and, the ruthlessness you need to take on a side like Exeter was completely absent in that match. And we still won at a canter. That's no good. And
Munster didn't visit our 22. So if a team can't get into your 22, they're
probably not going to score a try.
Well, Exeter
Like,
won't have trouble getting
Unless they
in.
have very long arms.
Let me tell you, Exeter will have no problem getting into our 22, and they love a try. I know Jason hates them scoring off mauls all the time, but and thinks they're puke football. But I have to say, they can score them out wide as well. They can do quite a lot. We'll see. Like, they've got obviously stars like Cog, who we all know about, Henry Slade, who we all know about. But your man O'Flaherty, who's, I don't know, maybe Leinster will keep him quiet. I don't know, but he can run him in for fun as well. It's the way they do a lot of screen passes and all that kind of fancy shite out in the back line. You know, they're not just a forward team. They're not just a we'll maul you over from 5 yards team, but they can do that too. I mean, isn't that the sign of it? Like, Leinster maul you over from 5 yards. Leinster can get within a few yards of the post and definitely get over every time. Doesn't make them a boring team. So, you know.
What the point you made, John, sorry, about everybody knows about Hogg, everybody knows about the star players, and that's true. The strength of Exeter is actually in the foot soldiers, if you like.
Of course, yeah.
That they're so good. They are. I mean, Exeter lost very few players to the England squad. They lost relatively few players to the internationals, because the whole thing about Exeter is the team. The team is very strong. You can take the individuals out and you can put them one against another against anyone they're playing and say, oh, well, the other team has 13 players that are better than Exeter. They should win. And then the other team gets their asses handed to them on the plate because Exeter are a better team than them, and they're a better team than most teams. Last year they were a better team than every team. So
because they are a team that loses players, doesn't lose many players to the internationals, it means they can stay together all year and develop that kind of a team, you know. So
yeah, that kind of precision. It's
swings and roundabouts there, you know, on the old internationals. You know, it's great to have loads of internationals, but there is a downside. As a friend of mine is very fond of saying, there's no such thing as a single-edged sword, you know.
Which
they remind me of anyway. They remind me of Northern Ireland in the 1980s.
Yeah,
they're very, you know, they're some of the parts and all that kind of thing, but
don't they even have Georgie Best's cousin at fullback?
That's right. Yeah.
There you go, exactly. yeah. But they kind of have a few Norman Whitesides, and then they have, you know, like a few very average.
Who's Pat Jennings?
Bog standard. Like, I mean, you think of, say, you know, Ian Whitten won a European Cup and a league title with them, and you know, we've seen him play for Ulster. Was never in an arse's roar of getting on the Irish national squads. You know, he was a fairly average player and
Steenson, anyone?
Like very good at that level. But
yeah,
there you go.
Steenson is the classic example. Yeah.
And he came up from there's one guy left. They were saying it during the game. There's one guy left who came up from the championship with them. I can't remember who it was now, but it was one of the forwards, I think, one of the subs. But Garrett Steenson definitely did. He was playing in the championship with them and came up to. Did he win a league title? I think he might have.
I think he did. Yeah.
If he didn't,
he would have been one of his last seasons.
He lost about 4 to Saracens if he didn't.
But I have a friend.
So he really won.
I have a friend of mine, and he works for. He actually works for Gallagher on the TV side of Gallagher Premiership. And I asked him what do they think of Exeter, and he basically said that Baxter had come out and said the lads don't have the same never say die attitude this year, and that he felt that the games weren't big enough for them. And so, in other words, the team has kind of got to its Everest by winning. No, actually, by winning last year, by winning the double. That great teams go on and produce a kind of dynasty and stay there at the top for a number of seasons, and then can reinvent themselves or rejuvenate themselves like Leinster did when they had a sort of a fallow period for 2 or 3 seasons, and then they can come back and win a European Cup. Baxter was quite nervous, and from his comment that, you know, and you can see that perhaps when they've lost 5 games since Christmas, like their record is, well, they might be second in the Premiership. They've lost a third of their games. You know, you could obviously argue that the standard of competition is better, but like they've lost to some pretty average teams. And as you said, John, like they don't lose enormous amount of players. Like they probably lost Cowan Dickey, Gray, Hill, Slade, Hogg, you know, out there to the national teams.
I would say about Baxter, he does what my grandmother would say. Rob Baxter says more than his prayers. You know, sometimes you can't necessarily trust everything that comes out of his mouth. Not in a bad way, but you know, he's very wily.
I actually listened to a few of his interviews, and he's actually done something which I think is quite unusual and rare in rugby. If you listen to most coaches, they tend to play down their own achievements, play up the other team. And Baxter's actually, you know, in one particular interview he gave this week, he kind of said, well, you know, Leinster have a very good history, but I've read that they were looking at us. And why wouldn't they be looking at us? We're English champions, we're European champions. You know, they're kind of like big up in themselves, which, you know, kind of going for Mourinho, whereas you generally don't hear rugby coaches inflating their own team's egos or slapping themselves on the back.
I think managers give what the team needs. Gatland was great for that. That's why he always. I think that's why his record with Wales was one of the reasons why his record with Wales is so good, because he gave them whatever they need. If they needed a shield in the media, if they needed somebody to take the flak and shoot their mouth off and do something stupid, he'd do it and take the pressure off the team. If if they needed somebody to belittle the opposition, he'd do it. If they, whatever they needed, he'd do. And I think there's no harm in what the type of stuff Baxter's doing, because let's face it, you just said it. They're European champions. They won the double, like in a tough league with relegation. So they are, to be fair. So are we. We're 4 times champions. Okay, of a shit league allegedly, but we're four in a row champions. Nobody else has done that in any league.
My worries aren't about Exeter; they're about us.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
What Exeter? I mean, when Leinster are playing well, they tend not to take too much notice of the opposition actually, and work on the basis that if we do what we do well, we will get the outcome that is very process based. My worry is that we haven't had a chance to practice the process, or haven't had the process stressed. You have to stress systems, you have to stress processes to work out if they're the right ones. And we haven't had that stress. I mean, people have said, oh, guys have been already playing with Ireland, so that's, that'll get them match hardened. It doesn't. I mean, the collisions are going to be harder than you get in training. But at the same time, you're away playing for, an average team in a completely different system. That's not, what you do with Ireland is useless to you, apart from the actual, running around part.
I think you're over-egging it to suit your argument there a bit.
No, but if you're a team that's based on a precise process, and you've guys missing for 2 months,
I don't think you can turn around and say Ireland is. The standard of rugby in the Six Nations is far higher than in the European Cup. So you can't turn around and say an average competition.
No, I said an average team. Ireland are an average team within the European, Six Nations.
Well, there was 9 of them. If you look at the team that was selected last weekend, 9 of the starting 15 played for Ireland against England.
Yeah, that's not my point.
Well, no, but you're trying to make it fit into your argument, which is wrong, because Ireland, those players have played for Ireland for 3. So if you take an example of Henshaw, he played for Ireland against Italy, he had a week off, he played Scotland, and then he played against England. Then he played against Munster. So in those 5 weeks, he played 4 high-grade matches. So whether he played last weekend, sorry, why 3? Why 3
against Italy?
Yeah, okay, but he still played international, and I would wager that you would be far more sore after playing a match against Italy than you would against many of the matches you play in the Heineken Cup. Maybe not against Exeter, but definitely in other European Cup matches. Especially, I mean, look at the two matches that they against Northampton Saints earlier on this season.
Oh yeah, well they're rubbish. Like they're rubbish. That's why we're talking
Okay, well
about
that was one of the
Saracens,
matches in the European Cup. Yeah, but okay, but like
there's merit.
but anyway, my point is though that I just don't buy into this fact that they are going to be undercooked. That is complete rubbish. Most of them play for Ireland. They will have played together with the Irish team at a high level international. Saturday 3 weeks ago, they will have been playing against England, beating some of those players that are topping out for Exeter. They came back in, they didn't play particularly well. They've had a week training back with Leinster while they were fallow last weekend, and they're going to come back into this match all guns blazing. Like, I mean, I really don't see, like, for example, if you look at Hogg, like everybody was raving about what Hogg was going to do to Ireland again when he played for Scotland. And Sexton had his number. They put up bomb after bomb after bomb to him, and he couldn't handle it. So much so that Henshaw came in and
completely different teams.
What's that? Well, it
It's
was
almost
the same
as if they were
two
completely
players.
different teams.
Well, it was almost as though that there was the same two players, so they obviously knew how to handle Hogg.
Look,
The point I was-
can I bring those two arguments together into the one zone? Basically, what Dave is saying is that Leinster will be undercooked because, yes, they play big matches, but they haven't played them for Leinster. So Leinster, there's no point in playing karate when you're training for a judo contest or whatever stupid analogy I'm going to come up with. But the other side of it is, if they had played Toulon, we'd be worried about them playing, Six Nations game after Six Nations game after Six Nations game, straight into Munster, straight into Toulon. We'd be going, oh my God, the guys are absolutely creased. So while it's not ideal to not have a game the week before, like, you always want a game the week before Europe. It's been we used to always play Munster the week before Europe. It's a dress.
The players have said that they hated it. But John, the fans liked it, but the players have said that they hated it.
Okay.
Like O'Gara was on off the ball. No, I'm just telling you, O'Gara was on off the ball last night, and he was talking about the French season. He was obviously talking about himself, and he said you can't continually get yourself up for big games. You need a break, because they brought it in relation to Leinster. And he said it'd be great for them because they will have their minds and their bodies rested. He said secretly some of those players would have been delighted that match was postponed or cancelled, because that they would have that opportunity to rest, because they've just come off 8 weeks of 5 intense matches from the Six Nations. They've played Munster in a very highly charged emotional match where all of the local press are getting on the case of saying, well, it's Munster's turn. Even like O'Driscoll was back in back in Munster. Most of the media were backing them. People like on Leinster forums were backing them, saying it's Munster's turn. And they came through that. And mentally and physically, players need a break. And they've had that, and they're going to come back in my view anyway. They're going to come back in fully, like someone like Cian Healy or Andrew Porter, who's played a huge amount of rugby over the last number of months, or Sexton, who has played, far more frequently than he's played, probably for the past year, in those 3 international matches that he played at 80 minutes. His body is obviously aging. He's 35 now. He needs time to recover, and you can't continually push and push and push your body. And that's why I think that week off will have benefited us.
Cycle your training. Yeah, I think on balance, I agree, Jason. I do take Dave's point, and there are downsides to, it's like everything. We're back to the single-edged sword, which Dave points out actually does exist. Scimitar, is that a single-edged sword? Anyway.
Most sabers.
So none of your saber rattling there, Dave. But on balance, I just think that, okay, they played England, as Jason made an excellent point there. They've played against some of the players they're going to be facing and won. They've played Munster, who we've discussed maybe they're not all that in a bag of crisps, but it's still a very high stakes, like Jason said, emotional game. So they're not undercooked physically. They're not short of match fitness. They're not short of any of that. What they're short of is
playing for Leinster.
Playing for Leinster. And what have they got? They've got 12, 14 days, well, 13 anyway, days of being able to train their arses off with Stuart and Leo. And, you know, it's not ideal. A match might be better.
That's where my worry lies.
Well, I think
these
the
guys
balance
don't play for Leinster on a frequent basis. You know that, like, how many matches will Keenan play for Leinster this year? Like, he plays the European matches. He might play a couple of significant Pro 14 matches, but that's it. That's all they play, because they're continually away with the Irish team. Like, do you know what I mean? So that they fit in. Like, that is their job. That they fit in for big games and they flitter out again. Like, do you think many of these guys are going to be in the Rainbow Cup? Like, I doubt it very much.
Won't be in the first couple of rounds anyway.
I don't think they'll play too much in it, but I still think that for a process-driven team to lose an opportunity to test the process is a big problem, because whatever about the standard, this Exeter team is a better team than England. It's a better team than England. They mightn't have better individuals, but they're a better team than England. And I think, as it happens, I think that Leinster are a better team than Ireland. The standard might be different, but the team is better. But we haven't had a chance to see that. And that's my worry.
That's a legitimate worry, Dave. But I just think on balance, I think it's a good thing. There are bad aspects to it, but overall, I think like having Sexton.
I'll tell you one thing that is positive to it, actually, is that because I was looking at the training photos, which are never actually as good a guide as people think they are, because for one thing, when they're released and when they say they're released are two entirely different things. But James Ryan was in contact, which means he's in stage 5 of the RTP. And after stage 5, if he comes through that, the next stage is available for selection. And I know he was in stage 5 because he was in contact. He was holding a tackle pad. You can't even do that if you're not in stage 5. So
maybe they just made him put it on and stand in the corner and nobody.
No, there was somebody in it. Yeah, well, maybe. But that's. I mean, so the one thing that the week off has done is given us an opportunity to maybe get 1 or 2 players back that we didn't have back.
Yeah. We have a huge injury list, so I was just looking there, and probably 5 guys that you'd probably say would be in the 23 if they were fully fit and injured, I'm not injured. So you're talking about Ringrose, Will Connors, Ryan, Dan Levy, Caelan Darris. You know, you're probably going to say that they will be certainly in the 23.
Did you say James Ryan?
I did, yeah. Sorry, I did. You know, and then even like if we're looking at our depth, you know, someone like Scott Penny, I know he's probably not in the European thinking yet, but like he's obviously going to be. He would, you know, like if there was a couple of guys that did fall down injured this week, I'm sure he would have, but he's obviously out. So you know, I just would have that concern. But then like I was just thinking, we selected our team for last week's match that we spoke about against Chilanda. We all got our predictions wrong. I noticed somebody mentioned that on Leinster Lines. That was fun. But I wonder if they're going to change the selection based on their opposition this week.
I'd say there'll certainly be a horses for courses element to it. I mean, the way you have to play against one team is different.
We saw how poor Exeter were at line-out time against Leon, and they have significant problems there. So you think that while Toner was selected, you know, do they go? And again, so you say, well, Leinster presumably are going to try and target their line-out. But, you know, will they go back to sort of what they did against Munster insofar as leave some guys on the bench and have a stronger team finishing the game? So, you know, I mean, you could pick a number of guys, but for example, would you start Porter and keep Furlong to come back in when necessary, or would you bring Fardy in? Because, like, if you are going to make a change during the game, would it be better? Like, what does Scott Fardy bring impetus to the team as a replacement, or is he better starting and have Baird come in off the bench? Because we've seen the difference he can make when he comes off the bench. We saw what he did in Murrayfield, and we saw what he's done, even in that match against Saracens, when he stripped the ball off Vinola, was it, or Itoje? So I suppose that rather than just going, well, we've picked the team for our match against Toulon, do we need to make some adjustments to it for this week?
There probably will be. I would suggest that the Leinster line-out or Leinster second row should always be Toner +1. Certainly currently anyway. Now it depends on who that +1 is, whether it's if James Ryan is back, well then that makes it kind of fairly obvious, and then it's no matter what you do with Fardy. Otherwise, I mean, if you want to put a line out under pressure, Toner and Fardy are your men for it, because they're such wily feckers, and Fardy's always up to something.
Yeah. He's a good man to come off the bench too, though, at 6 or 5 or 4 or whatever.
I think he gives cover, but I don't think he's going to change a game.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to have he's not going to have the same kind of impact as somebody like Ryan Baird.
Oh, no.
There's no reason why you can't have both of them.
Who is?
Either on the bench or starting or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're both so versatile.
See what they do there,
I do think that Scott Penny might have come into the conversation for this game if he had been fit, because he offers something slightly different than the other back rows we have. He's more of he plays more with the ball in hand. He's closer to Keith Gleeson than a Sean O'Brien, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, could possibly. Yeah, it's a pity that we won't get that chance with his hand injury. Again, like another concern. Will they bring in Carney instead of Lowe, or will they keep the same back line? I mean, I presume Rory
O'Loughlin. I can see why we don't have both of them.
Yeah, they'll drop Armour.
23.
Yeah,
I'd go with that.
Yeah,
we've done that quite regularly, and not so much recently because of injuries and guys been away. But the last 2 years we played Lowe and Carney together to good success.
It's a shame that the whole, we've seen James Lowe for 3 years, and we've seen how good he is, and a couple of poor performances for Ireland seem to jaundice everyone's view about him. And we've seen far better. We've seen how good he can be, and okay, he was exposed a couple of times, but he was exposed in his early Leinster career when he was learning new systems, and it's just a shame that it seems that he's almost been jettisoned from people's minds, going, oh, I know, Lowe's crap. But we know he's not. So
I'm sure Johnny Sexton would point out that James Lowe is just a bit of a slow learner.
I think we had that last week, or maybe we didn't, but he's been famous for. Stuart Lancaster said that he doesn't tend to learn stuff off a whiteboard the way that other players can do. That he has to see it demonstrated. He has to see it on the field. So that maybe is why it took him a while to fit into the Irish, or certainly in Leinster. That's what he was saying. So maybe that's why he hasn't bedded into the Irish defensive system as quickly as we would have liked. So anyway, he surely knows the Leinster one fairly well by now. So he could ease himself back in. I mean, he's playing here 4 years now. Is it? Certainly, he's in his
3.5.
I mean, there certainly were concerns about his defense in his very early days. I remember one match, was it away to Montpellier, where he was amazing going forwards and rubbish going backwards. But since then, obviously he's grasped the system. I mean, that was I think his second or third game for Leinster. It was his first European game. So I wouldn't be concerned about him.
Do we have any news on Josh Murphy?
I think wasn't he available for 24th man or something last weekend?
Apparently he was. Yeah, he was 24th man last weekend, so he could come into the mix as well. And obviously Rhys Ruddle as well, and Scott Fardy and Ryan Baird. We're not short on 6.
No, but
I'm thinking more cover.
Dan Levy and Scott Penny is two very handy 7s that were down. I know we've got Josh van der Fleer. It's what a kind of oh yes. lucky we have him. But most teams couldn't afford to lose those two guys. And as it is, we're very lucky to have Josh
and Will Connors.
Sorry, and Will Connors. Yeah, I didn't even mention him.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Jamison Gibson Park. Any update on him? Is his hamstring recovered or?
We're saying prayers to Saint somebody or other, Saint Cecilia.
Yeah, breaking
my heart.
I was trying to decide for Contepomi. I think it was Contepomi gave the press update at the start of the week. Well, he didn't mention those two lads as being injured. So I'm just wondering, like obviously in last week's team against Toulon, Hugh O'Sullivan, if Gibson Park is back fit, presumably he's going to slip back onto the bench.
Make a big difference to our end game, if you like. Coming on and flashing passes out to the wing like nobody's business might be just what we need.
Yeah,
we're chasing the game. But one thing is, it's going to be it's probably going to prove me wrong now and be the exact opposite. But it has the makings of a try fest. Both teams love a try. Both teams love running in tries. So it's a matter of, it's like the old All Blacks one. How many tries can you score? Because the opposition are definitely going to score a few.
I'm not sure about teams love running them in. They love scoring them.
Yeah, well, walking them, running them, falling them.
Bundling them in might be a more accurate description.
They're not all scored by Mike Ross,
Well, it's going to be a great weekend of rugby. Before we go on to the other quarterfinals, quick prediction from you boys.
Too close to call.
It is too close to call. It really is. It's too close to call. It's too close to call.
Either they'll win, we'll win. They'll win well, we'll win well, or it'll be a draw. I can guarantee you one of those.
Or somebody will catch COVID.
Or somebody will catch COVID.
Hopefully not. Hopefully it's not that outcome.
It would be horrible for such a game. I mean, we saw it last week where, there were 7 Heineken Cups on the line, if you like, between Leinster and Toulon, and we lost the game. I've been looking forward to it all week. And now, obviously, you've got European champions, Exeter, if you like, the Aravistes, the new kids on the block, against, Leinster with 4 Heineken Cups. And it's a real kind of, Exeter's first ever game, as you mentioned earlier, Jason, was against, first ever European Cup game was against Leinster. So you've got this kind of circle being closed to a certain extent. So it would be absolutely horrible if we were to lose this game. So I hope we won't. But in terms of prediction, Jesus, anyone who predicts this game is a liar.
I vary. My mood varies from day to day. I wake up one morning and think, we'll have these guys. I wake up the next morning and go, no. So yeah, who knows? That's the beauty of sport. Nobody knows who's going to win on a Saturday.
My pre-match grump may be 6 hours instead of its usual 3.
Well, before our game, La Rochelle take on Sale. La Rochelle second in the top 14. Sale third.
Congratulate them for breakfast.
Well, you'd think that La Rochelle, but remember, Sale are coached by, the revealer of Santa's real identity, the man who killed the Tooth Fairy, the stamper on dreams in chief in Alex Sanderson. So it wouldn't surprise me if Sale came out and blackguarded past them in a win. But I hope La Rochelle fucking destroy them.
Yeah.
Racing go to Bordeaux on Sunday.
That'll be an interesting one. You'll have to think Racing after our big dispatchment of Edinburgh. But who knows? I would have my money, even though they're away, on the
fancy Racing to win, but never underestimate the ability of a French team to throw one in when they're away from home.
Yeah,
it's true. It's very true. And the final game, Toulouse,
Toulouse by quite a considerable by a significant enough margin.
Yeah.
Very good,
Who
lad.
do Ulster have in the quarterfinals in the set of the Mickey Mouse?
Northampton Saints. They're away to
Oh, good
Northampton
God.
Saints.
Well, okay, so Ulster should really beat them, which means they won't.
So it's basically Rory Best versus Dylan Hartley or something, isn't it?
Can I just
By the way,
say
did you see Michael Lowry's try?
I did.
That was a cracker.
Fantastic. Absolutely brilliant try. And I watched both those matches in the Challenge Cup, the two Irish teams. Terribly disappointed with Connacht. And Connacht just did what Connacht do. They give you hope and then they pull out the carpet from under your feet. Like that match was on a plate for them. They played Leicester Tigers seconds and couldn't take advantage of it.
Yeah. Connacht, they must be the most infuriating team to follow.
Oh, you'd have to think so, wouldn't you?
Mm.
Yeah, and I said, oh, you know, Ulster. We mentioned there with Larry's try. I thought they played very well. They took their win. You mentioned about keeping the foot on Munster's throat. Well, Ulster kind of put their foot on Quinn's throat when they kind of got that lead and they built on it. Even though Quinn's had played a very weak inside, it didn't faze Ulster. They just said, right, well, we've just been ruthless, and I think they scored 7 tries and just killed them.
The thing that worries me about Ulster is, I mean, they could win the Challenge Cup this year, and because their team is good enough. But not unlike Claremont, there's an element of scrum diddlies about them. Little bit of flake about that Ulster team. They could just as easily lose the Saints as win.
It's interesting. There's 5 English teams, and we were saying earlier there's 5 French teams.
And by the way, yes, I am hoping that somebody will offer me free ice cream for mentioning all these things. But anyway, go on.
There's five English teams in the Challenge Cup quarters, and there's 5 French in the Heineken Cup. Whether that says anything, I don't know. But in both cases, they're all playing each other, except obviously one can't. So we've got Bath, London Irish, Leicester, Newcastle, and then, as you've mentioned, Saints playing Ulster. And in the main competition, we've 2 all French quarters and a 5th French team in the running. So yeah, it could be a lot of French in the final stages of the Heineken Cup, and a lot of English in the final stages of the Challenge Cup. We shall see.
Shall see. Anyway, boys, as ever,
let's hope there's some Irish in the final stages of both.
Yep.
Exactly. Here. Anyway, boys, thanks very much. Thanks very much for watching. If you are following us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, please give us a like, subscription, and a thumbs up. Thanks again. Cheers.